The stone floor cracked beneath Mira Voss's knees, as the iron door in front of her let out a sound she had never heard before, a deep groaning hum that rolled through her chest like thunder trapped inside her own bones. She had only touched it, that was all. She had only pressed her palm flat against the cold metal to steady herself while she reached for a fallen rag, and now the entire vault chamber was shaking, and the torches along the wall bent sideways, as if a wind had rushed through a room that had no windows and no doors, except the one glowing red beneath her hand. She pulled her hand back so fast that she stumbled and fell onto the stone, but the light did not stop. It spread across the surface of the seal, in thin golden lines, like veins waking up after a long sleep, and the low humming grew louder, until it was no longer a sound she heard with her ears, but one she felt in her teeth. Somewhere far above her, in the halls of the fortress, warriors froze mid-step. Guards standing watch at the outer walls staggered, as the ground beneath them trembled, faint but unmistakable. In the great hall, cups of wine tipped over on long wooden tables. And in his private chamber at the top of the North Tower, Alpha King Draven Ashcombe rose from his chair so fast that it toppled behind him, because he had felt it before anyone told him a single word. He had felt it in the marrow of his bones, a call as old as his family line, a call that had not sounded in 412 years. He did not wait for a guard to explain. He did not wait for a runner to bring news. He moved. Mira did not know any of this yet. She only knew that she was a servant girl who cleaned floors and dusted forgotten rooms, and that she had just done something that felt impossibly wrong. She pressed herself against the far wall of the vault chamber, staring at the door, at the seal shaped like a great iron eye ringed with old carvings she had never been able to read. It was still glowing. It was still humming. And now, faintly, she could hear boots pounding down the stone corridor outside, dozens of them, fast and heavy and coming straight toward her. She had been told since she was a child never to enter this chamber. It was one of the oldest rules of the fortress, older than the newest guard captain, older than most of the servants who worked here. The vault was sealed, and the seal was sacred, and no one who was not of royal blood was permitted to come near it. She had broken that rule only because her supervisor, a tired old woman named Greta, had sent her in with a broom and a warning to be quick and to touch nothing. She had touched something, and now the whole fortress knew it. The heavy door at the end of the corridor slammed open, and torchlight spilled into the chamber ahead of a wall of armored bodies. Mira scrambled to her feet, her back pressed flat against cold stone, her broom fallen and forgotten at her side. The guards who entered first raised their weapons the moment they saw her, shouting words she barely understood through the pounding of her own heartbeat, and for a terrible second she believed this was where her life would end, in a dusty room, over a mistake she had not meant to make. Then a voice cut through the chaos, low and commanding, and every guard in the room went still. Draven Ashcombe stepped through the doorway, and the air itself seemed to bend around him the way it always did when he entered a room, though Mira had never been close enough before to feel it herself. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dressed in dark clothing that looked like it had been thrown on in haste, his golden eyes fixed not on the glowing seal but on her. "Move away from the door," he said, and though his voice was quiet, it filled the entire chamber. Mira obeyed instantly, sliding along the wall until there was nothing but empty stone between her and the guards. She kept her eyes down, the way she had been trained to do since she was old enough to carry a bucket, but she could feel his gaze on her like a physical weight. He walked past the guards without looking at them and stopped in front of the seal. For a long moment, he simply stared at it, at the golden light still pulsing faintly beneath the carvings, and something crossed his face that Mira could not name. It was not anger, not yet. It was something closer to disbelief, the look of a man staring at something he had been told his entire life could never happen again. "Who touched this?" he said, not turning around. No one answered. The guard shifted uneasily, and Mira felt every drop of blood leave her face. "I asked a question," Draven said, and now there was an edge in his voice that made the torches seem to flicker lower. "Who touched the seal?" Mira knew that lying would be pointless. There was no one else in the room who could have done it, and even if there had been, she was not the kind of person who could hold a lie together under pressure like this. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "I did," she said. "I did not mean to. I was cleaning, and I lost my balance, and I put my hand on it to catch myself. I did not know it would do this. I am sorry." The silence that followed felt endless. Draven turned slowly, and for the first time, he really looked at her, not the way a king looks at a servant who happens to be standing in a room, but the way someone looks at a puzzle they cannot solve. His eyes moved over her face, her plain gray dress, her chapped hands still trembling slightly at her sides, as if he were searching for something in her features that would explain what had just happened. "What is your name?" he said. "Mira," she answered. "Mira Voss." He said nothing for a moment. Then he turned back to the guards. "Take her to the west chamber. Guard the door. No one speaks to her. No one touches her, until I say otherwise." "My king," one of the guards said carefully. "Should we not simply—" "No one touches her," Draven repeated, and his voice left no room for argument. Two guards stepped forward to take Mira by the arms, not roughly, but firmly enough that she understood she had no choice in the matter. She let them lead her out of the vault chamber, casting one last look over her shoulder at the seal, which was finally beginning to dim, its golden light fading back into cold gray iron, as if it had never woken at all. But it had woken, and nothing in the fortress would ever be quite the same again. The west chamber was small and windowless, with a single wooden chair and a narrow cot pushed against the wall. It was not a cell exactly, but it was not far from one either. The door had a lock on the outside, and Mira heard it turn the moment she was left alone inside. She sat on the edge of the cot, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to understand what had just happened, and failing completely. She had grown up in this fortress, or near enough to it. She did not remember her parents. She had been raised in the servants' quarters by whoever had time to watch her, moved from one caretaker to another until she was old enough to work, and by then, no one asked questions about where she had come from, because there simply were not answers to give. She was told her mother had died shortly after she was born, though even that detail felt thin and second-hand, the kind of story passed along so many times that no one quite remembered the original source. She had never once imagined that she might be anything more than what she appeared to be, a servant, an orphan, a girl with no family name worth mentioning, and no future beyond the work in front of her. And yet the seal had glowed for her. She did not understand what that meant, not really, but she had lived in this fortress long enough to know the stories whispered among the other servants late at night, stories about the Iron Seal and the bloodline of kings, about an ancient magic tied to the first Ashcombe ruler that could recognize true heirs, no matter how far removed or hidden they might be. She had always thought those stories were just that, stories, the kind of thing servants told each other to make the long night watches pass more quickly. Now she was not so sure. Hours passed. She could not tell how many, since there was no window in the room to mark the movement of the sun, but her stomach had begun to ache with hunger before she heard footsteps approaching the door again. The lock turned, and she stood quickly, smoothing down her dress out of habit, even though she knew it would do nothing to change how she looked. It was not Draven who entered first, but an older man with silver hair and sharp, assessing eyes, dressed in robes that marked him as one of the pack elders. Two guards followed him in, and behind them, finally, came the king himself, his expression unreadable. The elder studied Mira for a long moment without speaking, walking a slow circle around her, the way one might examine a horse before deciding whether to buy it. Mira forced herself to stand still, though every instinct told her to shrink away from his scrutiny. "This is the girl," the elder said finally, though it was not really a question. "This is the girl," Draven confirmed. "And you are certain the seal responded to her touch, and not to some trick, some device hidden on her person?" "I saw it myself," Draven said. "There was no trick. The seal answered her the way it has never answered anyone in my lifetime, or my father's, or his father's before him." The elder's jaw tightened. He turned back to Mira, his gaze narrowing. "Tell me your parents' names, girl." "I do not know them," Mira said honestly. "I was told my mother died when I was very young. I never knew my father at all." "Convenient," the elder muttered, though Mira was not sure whether the comment was meant for her or for Draven. A girl with no name to trace, no family to question, appearing out of nowhere to trigger the one relic in this fortress, capable of ending a dynasty. "I did not appear out of nowhere," Mira said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. "I have lived and worked in this fortress since I was a child. Anyone here can tell you that." That is not the same as knowing where you came from before that, the elder said sharply. Draven raised a hand, and the elder fell silent immediately, though his expression remained tight with suspicion. Elder Corwin, Draven said, I understand your concern. I share it. But threatening a girl who has done nothing but her assigned work will not give us answers. If there is something to uncover about her origins, we will uncover it properly. And if she is a threat to the throne, Corwin said, properly may not be fast enough. She is unarmed, untrained, and terrified, Draven said flatly. Whatever she is not a threat tonight. Leave the questioning of her past to those who can actually find the truth. I want the fortress records searched. Birth records, servant registries, anything from 18 years back. If she has a bloodline worth tracing, we will find it in ink before we find it in guesswork. Corwin did not look satisfied, but he inclined his head in reluctant agreement and left the room without another word, his robes sweeping behind him like a closing curtain. For a moment, it was only Mira and Draven and the two silent guards standing near the door. Draven studied her again, the same searching look he had given her in the vault chamber, as if he could find the answer written somewhere on her face, if he simply looked hard enough. You are frightened, he said finally. It was not quite a question. Yes, Mira admitted. There seemed little point in pretending otherwise. You have reason to be. What happened today has not happened in over 400 years. There are people in this fortress who will see you as a danger before they see you as anything else, simply because they do not understand you yet. He paused. I do not fully understand you either, but I do not believe you meant to do what you did. I saw your face when the seal activated. That was not the face of someone executing a plan. It was not, Mira said quietly. I do not know why it happened. I only touched it because I lost my balance. I have cleaned that hallway 100 times, and never once thought to go near the door. And yet today you did. Today I did, she agreed. And even she could hear how strange it sounded when spoken aloud. Draven was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes searching hers in a way that made her feel as though he were trying to see straight through, to whatever truth lived beneath her skin. You will remain here for now, he said finally. Not as a prisoner, as someone we are trying to protect, as much as understand. Food will be brought to you. Guards will remain outside the door, but they are there to keep others out, as much as to keep you in. Do you understand? I understand, Mira said, though understanding and feeling safe were not the same thing, and she did not feel safe at all. Draven turned to leave, but at the door he paused, glancing back at her one final time. Whatever you are, Mira Voss, he said, the seal has not made a mistake in 400 years. I do not believe it made one today either. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, the lock turning with a heavy final click. Mira sat back down on the narrow cot, staring at the closed door, her mind racing through everything that had happened in the space of a single afternoon. She had begun the day as a servant girl, with a broom in her hand, and no thoughts beyond the floors she needed to sweep. She was ending it locked in a chamber, suspected by an elder of the pack, watched by guards, and spoken to, almost gently by a king, who by every rule she knew, should have had her executed on the spot for what she had done. Something had changed inside that vault chamber, something far larger than the golden light that had flared across an ancient iron door. She could feel it, a shift in the ground beneath her feet, that had nothing to do with the earlier tremor, and everything to do with the fact that for the first time in her life, someone was asking who she really was. And for the first time in her life, she did not have an answer. Outside the small chamber, in the corridors of the fortress, whispers had already begun to spread from guard to guard, from servant to servant, carried faster than any official announcement could travel. A girl, a servant. The seal had chosen a servant. By morning, the story would reach every corner of the fortress walls, and by the following week, it would travel far beyond them, carried by messengers and traders, and anyone with a reason to speak of the Ashcombe line to those who lived outside its protection. Not everyone who heard the story would react with wonder. Some would react with fear. Others, in places far from the fortress, would react with something colder and far more calculating, already turning the news over in their minds, like a blade being tested for its edge, already beginning to ask the very same question the elder had asked in that small chamber only hours before. Who exactly was Mira Voss? And what did it mean for the future of the Ashcombe throne that after 412 years of silence, the Iron Seal had finally chosen to answer? Morning came slowly to the small chamber. Though Mira could only guess at the hour by the tray of food, a silent guard slid through the door, and by the faint change in the quality of light seeping under the doorframe from the corridor torches outside. She had not slept, not really. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the golden light spreading across the Iron Seal again, felt the floor trembling beneath her knees, heard the pounding of boots rushing toward her from every direction. She was still turning the memory over in her mind when the door opened again, faster and with less ceremony than the night before. Draven Ashcombe stood in the doorway, and this time his face was not unreadable. It was tight, with barely controlled anger, and for a terrible moment, Mira thought perhaps Elder Corwin had convinced him overnight that she needed to be dealt with more permanently. "Get up," he said, "now." She rose from the cot immediately, her heart hammering. "What is happening?" "The council chamber," he said. "The elders have called an emergency gathering. Word of what happened in the vault has already spread beyond these walls, faster than I can control it. And now every pack leader within 3 days' ride is sending messengers demanding explanations I do not have." He turned and walked quickly down the corridor, and Mira hurried to keep pace, flanked closely by the 2 guards who had watched her door through the night. The fortress around her looked different in daylight, busier, filled with servants who stopped their work to stare as she passed, their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and something closer to suspicion. She kept her gaze forward, though she could feel every glance like a physical touch against her skin. The council chamber was a vast room she had never once been permitted to enter, with a high ceiling, supported by carved stone pillars, and a long table, where the fortress elders already sat waiting. Elder Corwin occupied the seat closest to the head of the table, his expression as sharp and unwelcoming as it had been the night before. Beside him sat several other elders Mira did not recognize, along with what appeared to be a handful of senior warriors, whose faces were carved from the same stern stone as the pillars around them. Every eye in the room turned to her the moment she stepped through the doorway. "This is her," Corwin said, though again, it was not a question, so much as an announcement to the rest of the gathered council. "The servant girl," the seal recognized. Murmurs rippled around the table. Mira felt her face heat, and she forced herself to stand straight despite the urge to look at the floor. "Sit," Draven said, gesturing toward a chair near the foot of the table, far from the head where he took his own seat. It was not a position of honor, but it was not a position of complete disregard either, and Mira understood, in some instinctive way, that he had placed her there deliberately, close enough to be part of the discussion, far enough to avoid provoking the elders any further than necessary. "We will begin with the facts as we understand them," Draven said, his voice carrying easily across the chamber. "Yesterday afternoon, the Iron Seal in the fortress vault activated for the first time in recorded history since the reign of my ancestor, King Alaric Ashcombe. It responded to physical contact from Mira Voss, a servant employed within these walls for as long as anyone can recall. I witnessed the activation myself. There is no dispute about what happened." "There is a great deal of dispute about what it means," Corwin said sharply. "The seal was forged to recognize direct descendants of King Alaric's bloodline. It has rejected every claimant who has ever attempted to test it, including several of our own royal cousins over the centuries, who hope to press a claim to the throne. For it to suddenly recognize a servant girl with no known family, no recorded lineage, is either a miracle or an omen, and I do not believe in miracles that arrive so conveniently." "Are you suggesting the seal itself has been tampered with?" Draven asked, an edge creeping into his voice. "I am suggesting," Corwin said carefully, "that we do not yet know enough to rule anything out, including the possibility that this girl, or someone who arranged for her presence in this fortress long ago, has been planning this moment for years." Mira's stomach twisted painfully. "I did not plan anything," she said before she could stop herself, and every head in the room turned toward her. "I have lived here since I was small. I clean floors. I mend linens. I have never once thought about that vault or that door before yesterday, when I only touched it because I stumbled while trying to catch a fallen rag. I would not know how to plan something like this even if I wanted to." "A convincing answer," Corwin said, though his tone suggested he found it anything but convincing. But convenient answers are easy to give when the truth is hidden. Elder Corwin, Draven said, his patience visibly thinning, accusing her of deception, without a single piece of evidence, does nothing to help this council understand what has actually happened. I ordered the fortress records searched last night. What have we found? A younger elder, near the far end of the table, cleared his throat and unrolled a scroll in front of him. We located a partial servant registry from 18 years past, he said. Most records from that period were damaged in the fire that struck the Eastern Archive 11 years ago, but what remains shows an entry for a woman named Sela, employed briefly in the fortress kitchens, who left without formal release from her duties. The entry notes she was reported to be with child at the time of her departure. The room went very still. Is there a surname recorded? Draven asked. None, the elder said. Only the single name, and a note in the margin, written in a different hand, that reads simply, "Sent away before the purge." Mira felt the blood drain from her face. What purge? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No one answered her directly. Instead, the elders exchanged glances heavy with meaning she could not fully interpret, and Corwin's expression shifted from suspicion to something closer to alarm. 18 years ago, Draven said slowly, as though piecing the memory together even as he spoke it aloud. There was unrest within the fortress. My father ordered an investigation into a suspected conspiracy against the throne. I was young. I remember little of it, beyond the fact that several families disappeared from the fortress within the span of a few months, and no one spoke of them again. Disappeared, Corwin repeated carefully, or were removed, by order of your father, because they represented a threat to your claim to succession. Draven's jaw tightened, but he did not argue the point. If that is true, he said, then it is possible this woman, Sela, fled the fortress during that purge, because she was in danger, and if she was in danger because of her bloodline, then her child would carry that same bloodline forward. Her child, Corwin said, turning his sharp gaze back to Mira, who would be approximately your age now, Miss Voss. Mira's hands had begun to tremble in her lap, and she pressed them flat against her knees to steady them. I do not know if that woman was my mother, she said. I do not know anything about her. I was told my mother died shortly after I was born. That is all I have ever known. Told by whom? Draven asked, leaning forward slightly. Mira hesitated. By the caretakers who raised me. I never questioned it as a child. It was simply the truth I grew up with, the same way I grew up knowing which hallways to sweep and which meals to prepare. I never had a reason to ask for more. Then perhaps it is time someone gave you more, Draven said quietly. The council chamber fell into a tense, uneasy silence, broken finally by Corwin, who rose from his seat with visible reluctance. Even if the girl's account is true, even if she is entirely unaware of her own origins, that does not resolve the danger she represents. If word reaches the wrong ears that a lost bloodline has resurfaced within these walls, capable of contesting the current line of succession, we will not be dealing with quiet questions in a council chamber. We will be dealing with war. I am aware of the stakes, Corwin, Draven said. I have been aware of them since the moment that seal activated. That is precisely why I intend to handle this carefully, rather than rashly, and why I will not permit this girl to be harmed, while so much remains unknown. And if further investigation confirms she is indeed the missing heir of the purged bloodline, Corwin pressed, what then? Will you simply hand over half your kingdom to a servant girl, because an old iron door decided to glow? I will follow the law of this pack, Draven said evenly. The same law my ancestors bound themselves to when they forged that seal in the first place. If the seal recognizes her blood, then her blood carries a legitimate claim, whether any of us find that convenient or not. I did not make that law. I will not break it, simply because it now inconveniences me. Mira sat frozen in her chair throughout the exchange, feeling as though the walls of the council chamber had shifted somehow, tilting the entire world she thought she understood at an unfamiliar angle. She had walked into this room as a servant summoned to answer questions. She was leaving it, she realized slowly, as something else entirely, a possibility, a threat, a claim, though to what exactly she still did not fully understand. The meeting continued for another hour, filled with arguments she only partly followed, discussions of ancient laws and succession rights, and the delicate balance of power between allied pacts that had held steady for generations. Through it all, Draven remained firm, refusing every suggestion from Corwin and the other cautious elders that Mira be confined more severely, or questioned more forcefully, or removed from the fortress entirely, until the matter could be settled at a safer distance. When the council finally dismissed, Mira rose on unsteady legs, unsure whether she had just survived something or merely postponed it. Draven caught her eye across the emptying chamber and gestured for her to remain behind, while the elders filed out, their whispered conversations trailing after them like smoke. Once the room was empty except for the two of them and a pair of guards stationed discreetly near the door, Draven finally allowed some of the tension to leave his shoulders, though his expression remained troubled. "I am sorry," he said, "that you had to sit through that." "Is it true?" Mira asked. "About the purge? About families disappearing?" Draven was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, as though he were looking back through years he had spent most of his life trying not to examine too closely. "I was young when it happened," he said finally. "Young enough that I was shielded from most of the details, but I remember faces that stopped appearing in the fortress halls. I remember questions I asked, as a boy, that were never fully answered. I always suspected there was more to that period than I was told. I simply never had a reason to dig deeper, until yesterday. And now you think I might be connected to it." "I think," Draven said carefully, "that the seal does not lie. Whatever else may be uncertain. If it recognized you, then somewhere in your blood there is a connection to my family line, one strong enough, and legitimate enough, to matter under our oldest laws. I intend to find out exactly what that connection is, not to use it against you, but because I believe you deserve to know the truth of where you came from, regardless of what it means for the throne." Mira studied his face, searching for any hint of deception, any sign that his words were simply another kind of performance, meant to keep her calm and cooperative. She found none, only a tired sincerity that surprised her more than she expected it to. "Thank you," she said quietly, though the words felt insufficient for the enormity of everything happening around her. "Do not thank me yet," Draven said. "What we uncover may not be simple, and it may not be safe. Corwin is not wrong that others beyond these walls will hear of this, and see opportunity in it, rather than truth. I need you to trust me, at least enough to let me help you find answers, even while so many people around us would rather you had none." Mira thought of the woman named Sela, a name she had never heard before today, a name that might belong to a mother she had never known she was allowed to search for. She thought of the purge, of families vanishing into silence, of a childhood built on a story that might have been only half true, or not true at all. "I trust you enough for that," she said finally. Draven nodded, something like relief passing briefly across his features, before the weight of responsibility settled back over him. "Then we begin properly," he said. "Today, before Corwin or anyone else decides to search for answers on their own terms instead of ours." Outside the council chamber, the fortress carried on with its usual business, servants moving through familiar corridors, guards standing familiar posts, the ordinary rhythm of daily life continuing, as though nothing extraordinary had happened at all. But beneath that ordinary surface, something had shifted permanently, a question now hanging over every stone hallway and every whispered conversation, a question that would not rest quietly until it found its answer. Who was Sela, and what had truly happened to her 18 years ago? And if Mira truly was her daughter, what price would that truth demand from everyone now bound together by it? The fortress archive smelled of dust and old parchment, a scent Mira had never paid much attention to before, though now it seemed to press against her chest with every breath she took. She stood between towering shelves of records, watching as Draven pulled box after box down from high shelves, searching for anything connected to the name Sela, or to the purge that had swept through the fortress 18 years earlier. It was slow work. Many of the records from that period had been damaged in the archive fire years before, their edges blackened and crumbling, entire pages reduced to fragments that told half a story before falling apart in careful hands. Mira found herself growing frustrated with each ruined page, each promising lead that dissolved into ash before it could offer any real answer. "There has to be something more," she said, setting aside another damaged ledger. "A name cannot simply disappear without leaving any trace behind. People who wanted to disappear during that time Made certain they left as little trace as possible, Draven said, not looking up from the box in front of him. If my father truly ordered a purge against a rival bloodline, then anyone connected to that bloodline would have had every reason to erase themselves from every record they could reach. Mira considered this, turning the idea over slowly. Then perhaps the records themselves are the wrong place to look. Perhaps we should be looking for people instead. Someone who was here during that time and remembers more than what is written down. Draven paused, studying her with an expression that suggested the thought had genuine merit. Greta, he said suddenly. The servant supervisor who sent you into the vault chamber. How long has she worked within these walls? Longer than anyone else I know, Mira said. She has been here since before I was born. She raised half the servants in this fortress at one time or another, myself included. Then she may remember something the records do not, Draven said, already moving toward the archive door. Come, we should speak with her before anyone else in this fortress decides to interfere with our search. They found Greta in the servants' quarters, mending a torn sleeve by the light of a single candle, her silver hair pulled back into its usual tight knot. She looked up as they entered, and something in her expression shifted the moment she saw Mira standing beside the king, a flicker of recognition and worry that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. I wondered when someone would come asking, Greta said quietly, setting aside her needle and thread. Mira felt a chill move through her. You know something? Greta was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folding together in her lap. I know that 18 years ago, this fortress was not a safe place to be, if your blood traced back to the wrong family. I know that a woman I once called a friend, left in the middle of the night, with barely more than the clothes on her back, carrying a child she had not yet given a name to. And I know that a few months later, a baby girl was left in my care, with instructions never to speak of where she had truly come from. Mira's breath caught in her throat. Me, she whispered. You are talking about me. I am, Greta said, her voice softening. I did not lie to you outright when you were young, child. I simply did not tell you everything, because I believed it was safer for you not to know. Sela was your mother. She feared for her life during the purge, and rightly so, because she carried the blood of a family your grandfather had marked for removal. She left the fortress to protect herself and to protect you, though I do not know precisely where she went after that, or whether she survived what came after. Mira sank slowly onto the edge of a nearby cot, her mind struggling to hold the weight of everything Greta had just told her. 18 years of believing herself an orphan, with no family worth mentioning, and now, in the space of a single conversation, she had a mother's name, a reason for her disappearance, and a bloodline, connected directly to the throne, that ruled over the very fortress where she had spent her entire life scrubbing floors. Why did you never tell me? She asked, her voice thick with emotion she had not expected to feel so strongly. Because telling you would have put you in danger, Greta said simply. As long as no one suspected your true bloodline, you were simply another servant, unremarkable and safe. The moment anyone learned the truth, you would have become a target, exactly as your mother once was. I made a promise to her before she left, that I would protect you the only way I knew how, by keeping you hidden in plain sight. Draven had remained silent through most of this exchange, but now he stepped forward, his expression grave. You said Sela's family was marked for removal by my grandfather. Do you know why? What threat did they pose that warranted such measures? Greta hesitated, glancing between the two of them as though weighing how much more truth the moment could safely hold. From what I understood at the time, she said finally, Sela's family were distant cousins of the royal line, descended from a younger brother of one of the earlier Ashcombe kings. Their claim to the throne was weak, nearly forgotten by most, but your grandfather feared it nonetheless, particularly during a period when his own hold on power felt uncertain. He ordered the family removed to eliminate any future challenge to his line, regardless of how unlikely that challenge truly was. And Sela survived that removal, Draven said slowly, by fleeing before it could be completed. She survived, Greta confirmed, though I do not know what became of her afterward. I have not heard word of her in all these years. For all I know, she did not survive long beyond her escape from these walls. Mira felt a fresh wave of grief settle over her, mourning a mother she had never truly known, whose fate remained an open wound rather than a settled fact. She wanted to ask 100 more questions about what her mother looked like, what she sounded like, whether she had loved the child she had been forced to leave behind, but the words caught in her throat, tangled with too much emotion to sort through in a single moment. Draven seemed to sense her struggle, and he placed a steadying hand briefly on her shoulder before turning back to Greta. "Thank you for telling us the truth," he said. "I understand the risk you took in doing so." "I did not tell you for your sake, my king," Greta said, not unkindly. "I told you for hers. She deserves to know where she comes from, whatever that knowledge means for the rest of us." Later, walking back through the quiet corridors of the fortress, Mira found herself unable to fully process the enormity of what she had learned. A mother named Sela, a bloodline connected to the throne through a forgotten branch of the royal family, a grandfather, Draven's own grandfather, who had ordered her family removed simply because their existence made him feel less secure in his power. "I do not know what to do with any of this," she admitted quietly as they walked. "Neither do I, entirely," Draven said, "but I know that we cannot simply pretend we do not know it now. The truth has a way of demanding to be acknowledged, whether or not it is convenient for the people who would rather it stayed buried." "Corwin will not be satisfied with this," Mira said. "He will say it changes nothing, that a story from an old servant is not proof enough to settle a matter this serious." "Perhaps not proof enough for him," Draven agreed, "but it is enough for me to know that whatever danger surrounds you did not begin with anything you did. It began generations ago, with fear and power, and decisions made by men who valued their own security over the lives of people who posed them no real threat. You are not responsible for that history, Mira. You are simply the one left standing at the end of it." Mira absorbed his words slowly, feeling something inside her shift, not quite settling into certainty, but moving closer to it than she had felt since the moment her palm first touched the iron seal. She was no longer simply a servant with no name worth remembering. She was the daughter of a woman who had fled danger to protect her, the last living thread of a bloodline someone had once tried very hard to erase entirely. "What happens now?" she asked. Draven was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the same careful weight he seemed to give every decision that touched on the future of his kingdom. "Now," he said finally, "we search for anything that might tell us whether your mother survived, and if she did, where she might be found. And we prepare ourselves for the fact that others beyond these walls will soon learn everything we have just learned, whether we wish them to or not. Secrets this large do not stay contained for long, not in a place like this." As if his words had summoned the very thing he warned against, a guard came jogging down the corridor toward them, his expression tight with urgency. "My king," he said, bowing quickly. "A messenger has arrived at the outer gate. He bears the colors of the Kessler Pack, and he insists on speaking with you immediately regarding matters concerning the fortress vault." Draven's expression darkened instantly, and Mira felt a fresh knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The Kesslers, she knew even from her limited experience among the servants, were no friends to the Ashcombe line. Their arrival now, so soon after the seal's activation, could not possibly be a coincidence. "It has begun," Draven murmured, more to himself than to her. "What has begun?" Mira asked. He turned to look at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something close to genuine worry in his golden eyes. "The part where the whole world outside these walls decides what your existence means for them," he said. "And I very much doubt their intentions will be as patient as mine have been." The Kessler messenger stood in the great hall, dressed in traveling clothes still dusty from the road, flanked by two silent attendants, who watched the room with the sharp, unblinking attention of trained warriors, rather than mere servants. "His name," he announced with a slight bow that felt more like a formality than genuine respect, "was Renwick, and he carried a message directly from Ilsa Kessler, leader of the neighboring pack that had shared an uneasy border with the Ashcombe territory for as long as anyone could remember. My Lady Kessler has heard troubling news," Renwick said, his voice carrying easily across the hall, "concerning an ancient relic within your fortress, and a servant girl whose blood it apparently recognized after 4 centuries of silence." Mira stood near the edge of the hall beside Draven, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to keep them from trembling. She had not expected to be present for this exchange, but Draven had insisted, arguing quietly that hiding her away now would only fuel suspicion rather than ease it. "News travels quickly," Draven said evenly, "though I am curious how it reached your lady's ears so soon after the event itself." "My Lady Kessler maintains many ears in many places," Renwick said, a faint smile touching his mouth that Mira did not trust in the slightest. She sends her congratulations on this remarkable discovery, and requests, as a gesture of goodwill between our packs, that the girl be brought before her for a brief examination. An examination, Draven repeated, his tone flattening dangerously. Purely to verify her lineage, Renwick said smoothly. My lady's family keeps extensive records regarding the old bloodlines of this region, records that predate even your own fortress archives. It is possible she could offer insight into the girl's true origins that your own council has been unable to uncover. Mira felt Draven's posture shift beside her, though his expression remained carefully controlled. That is a generous offer, he said, but I am afraid I must decline. Mira remains under the protection of this fortress, while matters concerning her lineage are properly investigated. She will not be traveling anywhere, particularly not into the hands of a pack whose history with mine has rarely been marked by goodwill. Renwick's smile did not waver, though something colder flickered briefly behind his eyes. My lady anticipated you might respond this way. She asked me to remind you that the old laws governing succession disputes are not the exclusive property of the Ashcombe line. Any pack with legitimate historical ties to the region retains a right to observe and verify claims that could affect the balance of power along shared borders. Refusing outright examination could be seen, by some, as an attempt to conceal rather than confirm the truth. Then let them see it as they wish, Draven said. I have nothing to hide, and neither does Mira. But she will not be handed over to a rival pack on the strength of a polite request wrapped around a threat. The hall fell into a tense silence, broken only when Renwick finally inclined his head, his smile fading into something more businesslike. I will carry your response back to my lady, he said, though I suspect this will not be the last time she extends her interest in this matter. The old bloodlines run deeper and wider than most people realize, my king. You may find that guarding one door does not close every path that leads to the truth you are trying so carefully to protect. With that, he turned and left the hall, his attendants following silently behind him, leaving a heavy, uneasy quiet in their wake. What did he mean by that? Mira asked once the doors had closed behind them. I do not know, Draven admitted, but I do not like the confidence with which he said it. The Kesslers do not make idle threats. If Ilsa believes she has some claim to knowledge about your bloodline that I do not possess, then we should assume she is not bluffing. Corwin appeared at the edge of the hall, almost the moment Renwick departed, as though he had been waiting just out of sight for the exchange to conclude. This is precisely what I feared, he said, his voice tight with frustration. Word has already reached the Kesslers, and if it has reached them, it has likely reached half the packs within riding distance by now. Every hour we delay a clear decision about this girl's status only invites more outside interference. I am aware of the risk, Corwin, Draven said, but rushing a decision under pressure from outside threats is exactly how mistakes get made. I will not be forced into hasty judgment simply because the Kesslers enjoy stirring unease along our borders. And if their interest is not simply about stirring unease, Corwin pressed, if Ilsa Kessler truly possesses records that could confirm or complicate this girl's claim, would it not be wiser to know what those records contain before she uses them against us at a moment of her own choosing? Draven's jaw tightened, and Mira could see the weight of the decision pressing down on him, even as he considered Corwin's point. Perhaps, he said finally, but I will not send Mira into Kessler territory to find out. If Ilsa wishes to share information, she can send it here, under terms we control, rather than demanding we surrender the one advantage we currently hold. That evening, after the tension of the day had finally begun to settle into a heavy, exhausted quiet, Draven found Mira in the small garden courtyard, tucked behind the servants' quarters, a place she had always favored for its relative peace, away from the busier parts of the fortress. She sat on a low stone bench, staring up at the darkening sky, her thoughts clearly far from the flowers growing around her. May I sit? Draven asked. Mira glanced up, startled to see him standing there without the usual entourage of guards trailing behind him. Of course, she said, shifting slightly to make room on the bench. He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air, though he kept a respectful distance between them. For a while, neither of them spoke, content simply to sit together beneath the emerging stars. I am sorry, Draven said finally, that your life has been turned upside down so completely, and so quickly. A few days ago you were simply cleaning floors. Now you are being discussed by rival packs and questioned by suspicious elders, and none of it was ever a choice you made for yourself. I did not expect an apology, Mira said honestly. Perhaps you deserve one anyway, he said. None of this is fair to you, whatever it eventually means for the throne, or for the future of this pack. You did not ask for any of it. Mira considered his words carefully, surprised by the sincerity behind them. I keep thinking about my mother, she admitted after a moment. Sela. I have a name now, a story, but I still do not know anything real about who she was, what she looked like, whether she ever thought about me after she left. It feels strange to grieve someone I never truly had the chance to know. Grief does not require a full understanding of what was lost, Draven said quietly. Sometimes the absence itself is enough to mourn. Mira glanced at him, studying his profile in the fading light. You sound as though you understand that feeling personally. Draven was quiet for a long moment before answering. My mother died when I was young, he said finally, not through violence, simply through illness that no healer in this fortress could cure. I do not remember her as clearly as I wish I did. Sometimes I catch myself trying to recall the sound of her voice, and I cannot quite manage it anymore. It is a strange kind of loneliness, missing someone you can barely remember. I am sorry, Mira said softly. As am I, for your loss, he replied, though it seems we have both learned to carry these particular absences without letting them define everything else about us. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the tension of the day slowly easing into something gentler, something that felt, for the first time since the seal had activated, almost like genuine companionship rather than obligation. Corwin will keep pushing for stronger measures, Mira said eventually. He does not trust me, and I understand why. From his perspective, I represent nothing but risk. Corwin has spent his entire life protecting this pack from threats both real and imagined, Draven said. He is not wrong to be cautious. But caution should not become cruelty, and I will not allow it to, regardless of how loudly he argues otherwise. And the Kesslers? Mira asked. What do you think they truly want? Draven's expression darkened slightly. I think they see opportunity in instability, he said. A weakened claim to the Ashcombe throne, a contested bloodline, an uncertain future. Packs like theirs have waited generations for exactly this kind of crack to appear in our foundation. I do not yet know what game Ilsa intends to play, but I intend to be ready for it, whatever form it eventually takes. Mira nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of everything unfolding around her. A few days ago, her greatest concern had been finishing her chores before nightfall. Now she found herself at the center of a struggle between ancient bloodlines and rival packs, a struggle she had never asked to be part of, and did not fully understand even now. Whatever happens, Draven said, rising from the bench as the last light finally faded from the sky. You are not facing it alone, I promise you that much, regardless of what Corwin or the Kesslers or anyone else believes should happen next. Mira watched him walk back toward the main fortress building, his silhouette outlined against the torchlight glowing from the windows above, and found herself, despite everything, feeling something she had not expected to feel amid all this uncertainty. Not quite safety, not yet, but something close enough to it that she allowed herself, just for a moment, to believe it might be possible. Somewhere beyond the fortress walls, in a territory she had never seen and knew almost nothing about, Ilsa Kessler was already setting other plans into motion, plans that had very little to do with goodwill and everything to do with the opportunity a forgotten bloodline's sudden reappearance had placed directly within her reach. 3 days after Renwick's visit, Draven summoned Mira to the training yard behind the fortress barracks, a place she had only ever seen from a distance while carrying laundry between buildings. The yard was empty except for the two of them and a single trusted guard captain named Rowan, who stood near the gate with his arms crossed, watching the proceedings with an expression of careful neutrality. Why am I here? Mira asked, glancing around at the packed dirt ground and the wooden training weapons stacked along one wall. Because I need to understand what you are capable of, Draven said, before anyone else decides to test that for themselves in a way far less controlled than this. I do not understand, Mira said. I am not a warrior. I have never held a weapon in my life beyond a kitchen knife. That is not entirely what I mean, Draven said. He studied her for a moment, then held out his hand, palm up, between them. Alphas within our bloodline carry certain abilities beyond ordinary strength, heightened senses, a connection to the pack bond that runs deeper than mere loyalty. If your blood truly carries the Ashcombe line, even diluted through generations, some trace of that ability may exist within you, whether you have ever noticed it or not. Mira looked at his outstretched hand uncertainly. What do you want me to do? Simply place your hand against mine, Draven said. Nothing more. Let us see what happens. Hesitantly, Mira raised her own hand and pressed her palm flat against his. For a moment, nothing happened at all, and she felt a flush of embarrassment creeping up her neck, certain this entire exercise had been pointless. Then warmth spread through her palm, gentle at first, then building steadily until it felt like a low current moving up through her arm and settling somewhere deep in her chest. She gasped softly, pulling back instinctively, though Draven's own expression suggested he had felt something too. What was that? She asked, staring at her own hand, as though it belonged to someone else. The pack bond, Draven said, his voice quieter than before, almost reverent. I have felt that connection with members of my own family, with warriors sworn directly to my service. I have never felt it with a stranger, not like that, not so immediately. Does that mean it is true? Mira asked, that I truly do carry your bloodline. It means the possibility grows stronger with every piece of evidence we uncover, Draven said. The seal, Greta's account, and now this. I do not think any of these things alone would be enough to convince Corwin, but together, they paint a picture that grows harder to dismiss with each new detail. Over the following days, Draven continued testing her in careful, controlled ways, always with Rowan present as a witness, always framed as private curiosity, rather than official proceedings that might draw unwanted attention from Corwin or the other elders. Mira discovered, to her own astonishment, that her senses had always been sharper than she realized, that she could hear conversations happening several rooms away if she concentrated, that she could catch scents on the wind that told her things about approaching weather or nearby animals long before anyone else around her noticed. She had simply never had reason to recognize these things as unusual before. She had grown up believing everyone experienced the world this way, that her sharp hearing and keen sense of smell were simply ordinary traits, rather than fragments of a dormant inheritance finally beginning to stir. It is strange, she admitted to Draven one afternoon, as they walked along the outer wall of the fortress, the wind pulling strands of her dark hair loose from its usual braid. For 18 years, I never once questioned who I was. Now every single day brings some new piece of myself I never knew existed. That must be overwhelming, Draven said. It is, she agreed. But it is also strangely wonderful, in a way I did not expect. I spent my whole life believing I had no family, no history worth mentioning. Now I am learning I come from something ancient, something that has survived even when powerful men tried very hard to erase it entirely. Draven glanced at her, something warm and complicated passing across his features. You speak of it almost as though you have already accepted the burden that comes with it. Have I accepted it? Mira mused aloud. I am not certain, but I no longer feel the need to run from it, if that is what you mean. Whatever this bloodline means for my future, I would rather understand it fully than continue pretending it does not exist. They had reached a quiet stretch of the wall overlooking the valley beyond the fortress, the late afternoon sun casting long golden light across the distant hills. Draven stopped walking, and Mira paused beside him, both of them taking in the view in comfortable silence for a moment. May I ask you something personal? Mira said eventually. Of course, Draven replied. Do you resent me? She asked. For what my presence might mean for your throne, for the stability you have spent your entire reign trying to maintain. Draven considered the question carefully before answering, his golden eyes fixed on the horizon. I did, at first, he admitted honestly. When the seal activated, my first instinct was fear, not curiosity. Fear that everything my family had built could be threatened by a claim I did not fully understand. But the more time I spend learning about you, about your history, about the injustice done to your mother's family generations ago, the less that fear feels justified. You did not choose this path, Mira. You were simply born onto it, just as I was born onto mine. I find it difficult to resent someone for circumstances neither of us had any control over. Mira felt something warm settle in her chest at his words, a feeling she did not fully trust herself to name yet, though she suspected, somewhere beneath the surface of her thoughts, she already understood exactly what it was. "Thank you for being honest with me," she said. "I intend to keep being honest with you," Draven said, "for as long as you will allow it." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching along the wall, and both of them turned to see Rowan jogging toward them, his expression tense with urgency that immediately dispelled the gentle atmosphere between them. "My king," Rowan said, slightly breathless, "Elder Corwin requests your presence immediately. Scouts have returned from the eastern border with disturbing news." "What news?" Draven asked, his posture straightening instantly into something more alert and commanding. "Kessler warriors have been spotted moving along our shared border, in unusually large numbers," Rowan said, "far more than would be expected for routine patrol. Corwin believes it may be a show of strength, or worse, preparation for something more direct." Draven's expression hardened, all traces of the softer conversation from moments before vanishing beneath the weight of renewed urgency. "Take me to him," he said, and then, glancing briefly at Mira, added, "Stay close to Rowan until I return. Do not wander the fortress alone until we understand what this movement truly means." Mira nodded, watching as Draven strode quickly away, with Rowan matching his pace, disappearing around the curve of the wall toward the main fortress buildings. She remained where she was for a long moment, staring out at the distant hills where, somewhere beyond her sight, Kessler warriors were apparently gathering in numbers that had alarmed even the fortress's most experienced scouts. She thought of Renwick's parting words in the Great Hall days earlier, his soft, dangerous smile as he spoke of paths that led to the truth regardless of which doors were guarded. She thought of Ilsa Kessler, a woman she had never met but who now seemed to hold some unknown piece of the puzzle surrounding her own bloodline, a woman apparently willing to move warriors toward the border rather than wait patiently for cooperation that had not been offered. Whatever calm she had begun to feel over the past few days, whatever fragile sense of belonging had started to take root within the fortress walls, felt suddenly, dangerously fragile again, threatened by forces far beyond her control and understanding. She pulled her arms tight around herself against a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air, and turned to follow the path Draven and Rowan had taken, determined not to remain idle while the fate of everything she had only just begun to understand about herself hung so precariously in the balance. The War Council convened within the hour, filling the same chamber where Mira had first faced the Elder's suspicion days earlier, though now, the mood in the room had shifted entirely away from questions of bloodline and toward the far more immediate concern of defending the fortress borders. Draven stood at the head of the table, maps of the surrounding territory spread before him, while Corwin and several senior warriors debated the meaning behind the Kessler movements. Mira had not been invited to this particular meeting, but she found herself standing just outside the chamber doors regardless, close enough to hear the raised voices within, her sharpened senses picking up details she would never have noticed only a week earlier. "This is exactly the danger I warned of," Corwin's voice carried clearly through the heavy wooden doors. "The moment word of the girl's bloodline spread, it invited exactly this kind of aggression. Ilsa Kessler sees weakness in our uncertainty, and she intends to exploit it before we can settle the matter internally." "We do not yet know their intentions are hostile," Draven replied, though even Mira could hear the strain beneath his measured tone. "It could be a demonstration of strength meant to pressure us into cooperation, nothing more." "And if it is more?" Corwin pressed. "If this is the beginning of an actual incursion, are we prepared to defend our borders while simultaneously managing the complications this girl's presence has created within our own walls?" The conversation continued for some time, growing more heated, as different warriors offered their assessments of the Kessler troop movements and the likelihood of actual conflict. Mira listened until her legs grew tired from standing, absorbing every word, every fear, every argument about a danger that existed, at its core, because of her. She could not shake the growing conviction that whatever happened next, whatever conflict might unfold along the border in the coming days, traced back directly to the moment her palm had touched the iron seal. Guilt settled heavy in her chest, an unfamiliar weight she did not know how to carry. When the meeting finally ended, and the elders and warriors began filing out of the chamber, Mira slipped away before anyone could notice she had been listening, retreating to the small garden courtyard where she had found some measure of peace before. She sat on the familiar stone bench, drawing her knees up to her chest, trying to steady the racing thoughts crowding her mind. She did not hear Draven approach until he was nearly beside her, his footsteps softer than usual, as though he had deliberately tried not to startle her. "You heard the meeting," he said. "It was not a question." "I did," Mira admitted, not bothering to deny it. "I know this is because of me, because of what happened in the vault. If I had never touched that seal, none of this would be happening. Your warriors would not be preparing for conflict along the border. Corwin would not be so afraid. You would not be carrying this burden alongside everything else you already manage. You did not choose to touch the seal with the intention of causing any of this," Draven said, sitting beside her. "You stumbled while cleaning a hallway. That is the entirety of your responsibility in this matter. That does not change the outcome," Mira said quietly. "No," Draven agreed, "it does not. But blaming yourself for circumstances set into motion generations before you were even born will not resolve anything, and it certainly will not help either of us think clearly about what comes next." He paused, studying her carefully. "The Kesslers did not begin circling this fortress because of you, Mira. They began circling because your existence exposed a weakness they had likely been searching for an opportunity to exploit for years. If it had not been the seal, it would eventually have been something else. Rival packs do not require legitimate reasons to test the strength of their neighbors. They simply require opportunities." Mira absorbed his words slowly, though the guilt did not fully lift, only settled into something quieter, more manageable. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we prepare," Draven said. "Warriors will be stationed more heavily along the eastern border. Scouts will continue monitoring Kessler movements closely, and I will send a formal message to Ilsa Kessler, making clear that any aggression toward this fortress will be met with the full strength of our pack, regardless of whatever internal matters they believe make us vulnerable." "Will that be enough to stop them?" Mira asked. "I do not know," Draven admitted honestly, "but it is the response available to us, and I intend to use it fully." Over the following days, the fortress transformed around Mira into something tenser and more alert than she had ever known it to be. Warriors moved with greater urgency through the corridors. Extra patrols rode out toward the eastern border each morning. Even the servants, usually focused entirely on their daily tasks, spoke in hushed, worried tones about the possibility of conflict looming just beyond the horizon. Mira found herself increasingly drawn into Draven's orbit during this period, not through any deliberate arrangement, but simply because the shared uncertainty of their circumstances kept pulling them back into each other's company. She began sitting in on smaller strategy discussions, offering what limited insight she could about the fortress layout from a servant's perspective, details about hidden passages and overlooked storage rooms that even some of the senior warriors had forgotten existed. "You know this fortress better than most of my own guard captains," Draven observed one evening, genuine surprise coloring his voice as she described a narrow servants' corridor connecting the kitchens directly to the eastern wall, a route that could allow warriors to move undetected in the event of a breach. "I have spent my entire life in these halls," Mira said, "cleaning every corner most people never bother to notice. It seems that knowledge has finally found some use beyond keeping the floors presentable." Draven smiled at that, a genuine, unguarded expression that Mira found herself treasuring more than she probably should have, given everything else weighing on both their minds. "Perhaps," he said, "your value to this fortress was never limited to the question of your bloodline at all." The comment settled warmly in Mira's chest, and she found herself studying him more closely than she intended, noticing the way exhaustion had begun to shadow his eyes over the past several days, the way the weight of leadership pressed visibly on his shoulders, even as he continued moving forward with steady determination regardless. "You should rest," she said gently. "You have barely slept since the Kessler warriors were first spotted." "There is little time for rest when a border conflict may be approaching," Draven replied. "Exhausted leaders make poor decisions," Mira countered. "Even I know that much, and I have never led anything more significant than a cleaning rotation." Raven laughed softly at that, a sound that seemed to surprise even himself given the tension of recent days. "You may be right," he admitted. "Though convincing me to rest, and actually managing to rest are two very different challenges." "Then let me help with the first part at least," Mira said, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Sit with me a while longer. Let your mind rest from strategy and border reports. even if only for an hour. Draven studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his expression before he finally nodded, settling more comfortably onto the bench beside her. They sat together as the evening deepened around them, speaking of smaller, gentler things, memories of childhood, favorite meals, the strange comfort of familiar routines even amid uncertain times. For that single hour, the looming threat of conflict along the border seemed to recede slightly, replaced by something quieter and more human, a connection neither of them had fully anticipated when this entire situation began. It was Rowan who eventually interrupted them again, though his expression this time carried less urgency than dread. "My king," he said, bowing quickly as he approached. "A rider has returned from the eastern border. Kessler warriors crossed briefly into our territory, near the old watchtower, before retreating. No lives were lost, but the message seems clear enough. They are testing our defenses, probing for weakness." Draven rose immediately, all traces of the earlier peaceful evening vanishing beneath renewed alertness. "Assemble the senior warriors," he said. "We reinforce the eastern border tonight." Mira watched him go, the same familiar knot of worry tightening in her stomach that had accompanied nearly every moment of the past several days. Whatever fragile peace she had begun building within these fortress walls, whatever quiet understanding had started growing between herself and the king who had chosen, against significant pressure, to protect her, felt suddenly, achingly fragile, against the growing shadow of conflict, spreading steadily closer with each passing day. She rose from the bench and followed after him, no longer content to remain quietly on the sidelines while the fortress she now called home prepared to defend itself against a threat that had, in some undeniable way, followed her here from the very moment the seal first recognized her blood. The eastern watchtower stood cold and silent, beneath a sky heavy with clouds, its stones scarred faintly from the brief clash days earlier, though no permanent damage remained beyond a few scorched marks along its base. Mira stood beside Draven at its top, looking out over the border where Kessler warriors had crossed and retreated, and felt the tension of recent days pressing down on her like a physical weight. "They will come again," Draven said quietly, his eyes fixed on the distant hills. "This was only a test, a way of measuring our response before committing to something larger." "How can you be certain?" Mira asked. "Because that is precisely what I would do in their position," Draven admitted. "Ilsa Kessler is patient and calculating. She would not risk a full incursion without first understanding exactly how prepared we are to meet it." They descended from the watchtower together, and as they walked back toward the main fortress, Draven fell into a thoughtful silence that Mira had learned, over the past several days, usually preceded something significant he was working up the courage to say. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, once they had put enough distance between themselves and the nearest guards to speak privately. "Something about the purge, and about my father, that I have not fully shared with you until now." Mira felt a familiar tightening in her chest. "What is it?" "I spoke with an old advisor of my father's yesterday," Draven said, "a man who served during the years of the purge, and has since retired from active duties within the fortress. I asked him directly what he remembered about that period, hoping to learn more about the circumstances surrounding your mother's family." "What did he tell you?" Draven's jaw tightened. He confirmed what Greta already told us, that Sayla's family were distant cousins of our line, descended from a younger brother of an earlier Ashcombe king. But he told me something more as well, something I did not expect. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "My father did not order their removal simply out of vague, general fear of a weak claim to succession. He ordered it because Sella's father, your grandfather, had begun quietly gathering support among several minor pack families, support that could have grown into a genuine challenge to my father's rule, had it been allowed to continue unchecked." Mira absorbed this slowly. So it was not simply paranoia, there was an actual conspiracy forming. "Perhaps the beginnings of one," Draven said, though whether it would have grown into genuine rebellion, or remained nothing more than quiet grumbling among a few dissatisfied families, no one can say for certain now. My father chose not to wait and find out. He ordered the family removed entirely, along with anyone closely connected to them, to eliminate the threat, before it could fully form. "Removed," Mira repeated carefully. "You mean killed?" Draven did not answer immediately, and his silence told her everything his words had avoided saying directly. "Some were killed," he said finally, his voice heavy with something that sounded almost like shame. "Others fled before the purge could reach them, as your mother did. I do not know the full extent of what happened to everyone connected to that family, only that my father considered the matter closed once the immediate threat had been eliminated, and the topic was never openly discussed again within these walls." Mira felt a complicated tangle of emotions rising within her. Grief for a grandfather she had never known, anger at the ruthlessness of a decision made generations before her own birth, and a strange, uncomfortable awareness that the man walking beside her now, the man she had begun to trust and even care for, carried the blood of the very ruler responsible for that violence. "Does that change how you see me?" Draven asked quietly, as though he had read the shift in her expression. "Knowing what my father did to your family?" Mira considered the question honestly before answering. "You are not your father," she said finally. "You did not make that decision. You were a child when it happened, just as I was an infant carried away in secret because of it. We have both inherited consequences from choices neither of us made." "That is a more generous response than I likely deserve," Draven said. "Perhaps," Mira agreed, "but it is also the truth. I cannot hold you responsible for actions taken before you had any power to stop them. What matters now is what you choose to do with the truth, now that we both know it fully." Draven studied her for a long moment, something like gratitude and relief passing across his features. "Then let me tell you what I intend to do," he said. "I intend to make certain the truth of what happened to your family is formally acknowledged before the Pack Council, regardless of how uncomfortable that acknowledgement proves, for those who would rather the past remained buried. And I intend to ensure that whatever claim your bloodline holds under our oldest laws is honored properly, not dismissed or diminished simply because it complicates matters of succession. Corwin will resist that," Mira said. "Corwin will resist a great many things," Draven replied, "but resistance is not the same as being right, and I have grown tired of allowing fear to dictate decisions that justice should be guiding instead." They continued walking in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the conversation settling between them not as a barrier, but as something that had, if anything, deepened the trust, already growing steadily since the day Mira first stumbled against the ancient iron seal. When they finally reached the edge of the training yard, they found Rowan waiting for them, his expression grave, in a way that immediately dispelled the fragile calm of the moment before. "My king," Rowan said, "there has been an incident within the fortress itself. One of the advisors, a man named Edgar, was found attempting to leave through the western gate under cover of darkness, carrying documents he had no authorization to remove from the archive." Draven's expression sharpened instantly. "What documents?" "Records concerning the purge," Rowan said, "and copies of everything gathered regarding the girl's lineage over the past several days. He claims he was simply organizing materials for safekeeping, but the guards found him attempting to meet with someone, waiting just beyond the fortress walls, someone who fled before he could be identified or captured." Mira felt a chill move through her, the earlier warmth of the conversation with Draven giving way rapidly to fresh alarm. "Someone from the Kesslers," she said quietly. "That would be my assumption as well," Draven said grimly. "It seems Ilsa Kessler is not content to wait patiently at our border for cooperation. She has found someone willing to smuggle information directly from within these walls." "Where is Edgar now?" Draven asked Rowan. "Held under guard, awaiting your judgment," Rowan said. Draven's expression hardened into something colder and more resolute than Mira had seen from him before. "Take me to him," he said. "I want answers, and I want them tonight, before whatever information he has already shared has time to do further damage." As they made their way toward the holding chamber where Edgar was being kept, Mira felt the fragile sense of safety she had begun building within these fortress walls, fracturing rapidly beneath the weight of yet another betrayal she had not seen coming. First the Kessler warriors testing the border, and now, apparently, a trusted advisor within the fortress itself, willing to share sensitive information with the very pack threatening conflict along their shared border. She wondered, not for the first time since the seal first activated beneath her palm, how many more layers of danger remained hidden beneath the surface of this world she had only just begun to understand, and how many more people within these walls she believed she could trust might prove, in the end, to be working toward purposes entirely their own. Whatever answers awaited them in the holding chamber, Mira understood, with a growing sense of dread, that the conflict brewing around her bloodline had already grown far larger and more dangerous than a simple question of ancient law and succession. It had become, in the span of only a week, a matter that threatened the very stability of the fortress itself, and everyone within it who had chosen, for reasons of loyalty or ambition, to take a side. The holding chamber sat deep within the fortress foundations, a plain stone room, lit by a single hanging lantern, where Edgar sat on a low bench, his hands folded tightly in his lap, and his face pale, with the particular fear of a man who understood exactly how much trouble he had brought upon himself. He rose quickly when Draven entered, though his legs seemed unsteady beneath him. "My king," he began, "I can explain." "Then explain," Draven said, his voice carrying a controlled fury that made even Mira, standing near the doorway, feel a chill run through her. Edgar's eyes darted between Draven and Mira, and for a moment, something like genuine regret flickered across his features. "I did not intend to betray this fortress," he said. "I believed I was protecting it. By carrying our private records to a rival pack in the dead of night?" Draven asked sharply. "By ensuring that if the girl's claim proves legitimate, there exists independent verification, beyond what your own counsel might be inclined to shape to its own advantage," Edgar said, his voice gaining a fragile kind of desperate conviction. "I served your father for many years, my king. I remember the purge. I remember families disappearing, and I remember the silence that followed, a silence I was too afraid to break at the time. When I learned that a survivor of that purge had resurfaced, recognized by the very seal your family has always claimed cannot be deceived, I feared history would simply repeat itself, that this girl would meet the same fate her family met 18 years ago, quietly and without any outside witness to hold your line accountable." Mira felt something complicated shift within her at his words, an unexpected sympathy tangled with lingering distrust. "You believed sharing information with the Kesslers would protect me?" she asked. "I believed it would prevent your disappearance from happening quietly, without consequence," Edgar said, turning to face her directly. "If outside parties know the details of your existence and your claim, it becomes far more difficult for anyone within these walls to simply erase you without notice, the way your family was erased before. That is not your decision to make," Draven said coldly. "Whatever your intentions, you have potentially placed this entire fortress at greater risk, by handing sensitive information directly to a pack already testing our borders with open aggression. I did not consider the border conflict when I made my choice," Edgar admitted, his voice heavy with genuine regret now. "I acted out of guilt for my past silence, not out of any desire to see this fortress harmed. I understand if that distinction means little to you now." Draven studied him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity of his words against the undeniable danger his actions had created. "You will remain confined until we fully understand the extent of what you have shared," he said finally. "Whatever your intentions, the consequences of your choice are now beyond your control, and beyond mine as well." As they left the holding chamber, Mira found herself troubled by more than simple anger at Edgar's betrayal. "He was not entirely wrong," she said quietly, once they were alone in the corridor outside. "About the danger of my disappearing quietly, without any external accountability. Corwin has spoken more than once about removing me as a solution to this entire situation." "Corwin speaks from fear, not from any actual intention to harm you," Draven said, though his tone lacked its usual certainty. "But I understand why Edgar's fear, however misguided his actions, is not entirely unfounded. This fortress has a history of solving inconvenient problems, through silence and removal, rather than open acknowledgement." "Does that trouble you?" Mira asked. "More than I can easily express," Draven admitted. "I have spent my entire reign trying to be a different kind of leader than my father was, more transparent, more accountable to the laws that govern our pack, rather than simply using power to bypass them when convenient. Edgar's actions, however dangerous, remind me that I have not yet fully succeeded in proving that difference to everyone within these walls." They continued walking in troubled silence, the weight of the evening's revelations settling heavily over both of them. As they approached the main courtyard, however, a commotion ahead drew their attention, raised voices and the sound of hurried footsteps echoing off the stone walls. They arrived to find a group of warriors gathered around Corwin, who stood with his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of vindication and grim satisfaction that immediately set Mira on edge. "What has happened now?" Draven asked, his voice tight with barely restrained frustration. It seems your advisor's betrayal has already borne fruit, Corwin said, gesturing toward a warrior who held a rolled parchment sealed with Kessler colors. This arrived at the outer gate only moments ago, addressed directly to the council. Draven took the parchment and broke the seal, scanning its contents quickly, while Mira watched his expression darken with each passing line. Ilsa Kessler formally requests a meeting, he said finally, to discuss what she calls a matter of shared historical significance concerning the girl's bloodline. She claims to possess records that predate even our own archives, records that could either confirm or complicate Mira's claim, in ways our own investigation has not yet uncovered. This is precisely the danger I warned of from the beginning, Corwin said. Now that she possesses information smuggled directly from within these walls, she has all the leverage she needs to insert herself into a matter that should remain entirely our own concern. Or, Draven said slowly, she has simply found the excuse she was always looking for, to formally involve herself in our succession dispute, regardless of what Edgar did or did not share with her. Mira stepped forward, drawing the attention of everyone gathered in the courtyard. Perhaps we should hear what she has to say, she said, surprising even herself with the steadiness in her voice. If she truly possesses records about my family, records that could offer real answers rather than fragments and guesses, would it not be better to know the full truth, regardless of how uncomfortable it proves? It could also be a trap, Corwin said sharply, designed to lure you directly into Kessler territory, where they could do with you as they please, regardless of any formal request for a meeting. Then we do not go to her, Draven said, an idea visibly forming as he spoke. We invite her here, to neutral ground within our own walls, under terms and protections we control. If she truly wishes to share information, rather than simply create opportunity for harm, she can do so on our terms, not hers. Corwin did not look entirely satisfied with this compromise, but he offered no further objection, perhaps recognizing that outright refusal would only invite further suspicion and conflict along an already tense border. I will draft the response, Draven continued, inviting Ilsa Kessler to the fortress under a formal truce, with terms that guarantee safety for both parties during the negotiation. As the courtyard slowly emptied and the warriors dispersed to their various duties, Mira remained standing beside Draven, her mind racing through the implications of what was about to unfold. A meeting with Ilsa Kessler, a woman whose intentions remained entirely unclear, who might hold genuine answers about her family's history, or might simply be using that history as a tool to further destabilize the Ashcombe throne. Are you certain this is wise? She asked quietly. I am certain it is necessary, Draven replied. We cannot continue operating in fragments and half-truths forever, Mira. If Ilsa truly possesses information that could clarify your claim, better to face that information directly, under conditions we control, than to continue letting fear and uncertainty dictate every decision we make. Mira nodded slowly, though the knot of anxiety in her stomach refused to fully loosen. Whatever answers awaited her in this coming meeting, she understood, with growing certainty, that the truth of her bloodline was about to become far more complicated and far more consequential than she had ever imagined possible only a week earlier, back when her greatest concern had simply been finishing her chores before the evening bell rang across the fortress walls. Ilsa Kessler arrived 3 days later, escorted through the fortress gates with a modest retinue of 6 warriors, far fewer than the show of force that had gathered along the border in previous days. She was younger than Mira had expected, sharp-featured and composed, moving through the fortress halls with the easy confidence of someone thoroughly accustomed to being underestimated and proving that underestimation wrong. The formal meeting took place in the same council chamber where Mira had first faced Corwin's suspicion, though this time, the tension in the room felt different, charged with the particular unpredictability of 2 rival powers meeting on carefully negotiated neutral ground. You have grown into quite the topic of conversation, Mira Voss, Ilsa said, once the formal greetings had concluded, her sharp eyes studying Mira with open curiosity, rather than the hostility Mira had braced herself to expect. A servant girl whose blood a 400-year-old relic finally chose to recognize. It is not every day such stories prove true, rather than exaggerated rumor. I did not ask for any of this attention, Mira said carefully. Few people who find themselves at the center of history ever do, Ilsa replied, a faint, knowing smile touching her mouth. but here you are regardless. Draven, seated beside Mira, with Corwin flanking his other side, cut directly to the purpose of the gathering. You claim to possess records concerning Mira's lineage that predate our own archives. I would like to see them. Ilsa gestured to one of her attendants, who produced a leather satchel and withdrew a collection of aged documents, carefully preserved despite their evident age. My family has maintained detailed records of the old bloodlines throughout this region for generations, she said, partly out of historical interest, and partly, I will admit honestly, because such knowledge has always proven useful in matters of succession and alliance. She spread several pages across the table. These trace the lineage of the younger Ashcombe brother whose descendants your grandfather's purge attempted to eliminate. According to our records, that lineage did not end with your mother's flight from the fortress, as your own archives seem to suggest. It continued, quietly, for several more generations before circumstances brought it back within these walls. Draven leaned forward, studying the documents with careful attention. This suggests Mira's claim runs deeper than a single generation removed from the throne. It suggests a legitimate, unbroken line, stretching back to the earliest days of our dynasty. Precisely, Ilsa said, which raises an interesting question, does it not? If her claim is as legitimate as these records suggest, and as the seal itself has already confirmed, what exactly does that mean for the current line of succession within your own fortress? The chamber fell into a tense silence. Corwin's expression had darkened considerably as he studied the documents, his earlier skepticism visibly wavering beneath the weight of evidence he could not easily dismiss. What is it you want, Ilsa? Draven asked directly. You did not travel here simply to share historical records out of goodwill. What do you hope to gain from this? Ilsa's smile sharpened slightly. Stability along our shared border, primarily, she said. A contested succession within your fortress creates uncertainty that affects every pack in this region, mine included. I would prefer that uncertainty resolved cleanly, through legitimate means, rather than through whatever quiet violence your family has historically preferred when inconvenient claims arise. Her gaze flicked briefly toward Mira, something almost sympathetic crossing her features. I do not wish to see history repeat itself, Mira Voss. Whatever else my intentions might include, I would prefer your claim be settled through proper trial, rather than through another convenient disappearance. Mira felt a complicated mixture of gratitude and wariness at Ilsa's words, uncertain how much of her stated concern reflected genuine principle, and how much simply served her own political interests in seeing the Ashcombe throne destabilized by internal conflict. There is a proper trial available under our oldest laws, Corwin said slowly, speaking for the first time since the documents had been presented. The trial by blood, a ritual not invoked in generations, designed specifically to resolve disputed claims to succession when the seal itself has offered recognition that conventional evidence cannot easily confirm or deny. I am familiar with the ritual, Draven said, his expression grave. It requires the claimant to prove her lineage before an assembled council of allied pack leaders, through both testimony and ritual combat, with the seal itself rendering final judgment based on how it responds to her presence before the full gathering. A dangerous proposition, Corwin added, but one that would settle this matter definitively, in a manner no rival pack could later dispute or use as an excuse for continued interference. Mira's stomach tightened at the mention of ritual combat, though she forced herself to remain composed as the discussion continued around her. What would this trial require of me exactly? She asked. Testimony before the assembled council regarding your lineage and the circumstances of your discovery, Draven explained. And a formal challenge, typically resolved through combat, with a designated opponent, chosen by the council, meant to test not martial skill alone, but the strength of conviction and bloodline the seal has already recognized within you. You would be facing real danger, Draven added, his voice tightening with obvious concern. The trial is not merely ceremonial. People have died undertaking it in past generations. Ilsa watched this exchange with evident interest. I would be willing to formally support convening such a trial, she said, and to have my own presence, along with witnesses from my pack, serve as additional confirmation that the proceedings were conducted fairly, without manipulation from either side. Corwin's jaw tightened at the implication that Kessler oversight might be necessary to ensure fairness, but he did not argue the point directly. If this is the path forward, he said instead, turning to Draven, We should proceed carefully, and quickly, before further complications arise from delay. The meeting continued for another hour, details of the trial discussed and debated, timelines established, and formal invitations drafted to be sent to allied pack leaders throughout the region, inviting them to witness what promised to be the first trial by blood convened in generations. Through it all, Mira sat largely silent, absorbing the growing weight of what lay ahead, a formal trial before assembled leaders from across the region, ritual combat that could easily cost her life, and the final, absolute judgment of an ancient seal that had already changed everything about her existence with a single touch. When the meeting finally concluded, and Ilsa Kessler departed the chamber with her retinue, Draven remained behind with Mira, the two of them alone, amid the lingering tension of everything just decided. "You do not have to agree to this," Draven said quietly. "There may be other paths forward, quieter ones, that do not require you to risk your life before an assembly of strangers." "Would those quieter paths truly resolve anything?" Mira asked. "Or would they simply leave my claim contested indefinitely, a source of ongoing danger for both of us, and for this entire fortress?" Draven did not answer immediately, though his silence told her he understood the truth of her question, even if he did not wish to accept it. "I am afraid for you," he admitted finally, the honesty in his voice striking Mira more deeply than she expected. "I have grown to care for you a great deal over these past weeks, Mira, far more than I anticipated when this all began. The thought of you facing ritual combat, facing genuine danger, is difficult for me to accept calmly." Mira felt her breath catch at his admission, the weight of unspoken feeling finally given voice between them. "I have grown to care for you as well," she said softly, "but caring for each other does not change the reality of what stands before us. If this trial is the only way to settle my claim definitively, to end the uncertainty that has already brought conflict to your borders and betrayal within your own walls, then I would rather face it directly than continue living beneath its constant shadow." Draven studied her for a long moment, something fierce and protective and tender, all mingling together in his expression. "Then I will stand beside you through every part of it," he said finally. "Whatever the council believes proper, whatever risk it brings to my own position, I will not let you face this trial believing yourself alone in it." Mira reached out and took his hand, the same gesture that had first revealed the pack bond humming quietly between them weeks earlier, and felt that same warm current pass between their joined palms, steadier now, more certain, as though it too understood the significance of the moment. "Then let us prepare," she said, "for whatever comes next." Outside the chamber, word of the coming trial had already begun spreading through the fortress and beyond its walls, carried by messengers, riding out toward every allied pack within reach, each one carrying news of an event unlike anything witnessed in this region for generations, a trial by blood that would finally settle, once and for all, the question that had begun the moment an orphaned servant girl pressed her palm against an ancient iron seal that had waited 412 years for exactly this moment to arrive. The great courtyard of the fortress had never held so many people at once, not in Mira's lifetime, and likely not in generations before it. Pack leaders from across the region had arrived over the preceding days, their banners raised alongside the traveling parties that accompanied them, filling the usually quiet grounds with a sea of unfamiliar faces, all gathered to witness the first trial by blood, convened in over 4 centuries. Mira stood near the edge of the courtyard as the final preparations were completed. Dressed in simple, practical clothing, rather than anything ceremonial, her hair braided tightly back from her face. Greta stood beside her, having insisted on being present despite her advancing years, her weathered hand resting reassuringly on Mira's shoulder. "Are you frightened?" Greta asked quietly. "More than I have ever been in my life," Mira admitted. "That is a reasonable thing to feel," Greta said, "but fear and courage are not opposites, child. Courage is simply choosing to move forward despite the fear, and you have already proven, over these past weeks, that you possess more of that than you likely realize." Across the courtyard, Draven stood in quiet conversation with Corwin and several of the visiting pack leaders, his expression carefully composed despite the visible tension in his shoulders. When his eyes met Mira's across the crowded space, something passed between them, unspoken but deeply felt, a reminder that whatever happened in the trial ahead, she would not be facing it entirely alone. The ritual began with formal proceedings. elders reciting ancient words that established the rules and significance of the trial for the benefit of the assembled witnesses. Mira was called forward to offer testimony regarding her lineage, and she spoke as honestly and clearly as she could manage, describing her childhood as an orphaned servant, the moment the seal first activated beneath her palm, and everything she had since learned about her mother, her grandfather, and the purge that had scattered her family across the region generations ago. When her testimony concluded, murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd, some skeptical, others visibly moved by the account. Corwin, standing near the front of the gathering, watched with an expression Mira could not fully read, though it seemed to carry less open hostility than it once had. The ritual combat came next, and Mira's opponent, a skilled warrior chosen by the council specifically for the trial, faced her across the packed dirt of the courtyard, wooden practice weapons in hand rather than true blades, a concession Draven had fought hard to secure given the trial's ancient tradition of lethal combat. Even without true blades, however, the fight proved fierce and demanding, testing not simply Mira's untrained physical skill, but the strength of the pack bond stirring within her blood. She fought harder than she had ever fought for anything, drawing on reserves of strength and speed she had only recently discovered existed within her, the same heightened senses and instincts Draven had helped her uncover during their private training sessions weeks earlier. The crowd watched in tense silence as the combat stretched on, neither combatant gaining a clear advantage for what felt like an agonizingly long stretch of time. In the end, it was not raw skill that decided the outcome, but the sudden, unmistakable flare of golden light that erupted from beneath Mira's skin as she deflected a final decisive blow, a physical manifestation of the bloodline the seal had already recognized weeks before. Her opponent staggered back, lowering his weapon immediately, and the assembled crowd fell into stunned, reverent silence. The final stage of the trial required Mira to approach the iron seal itself, brought out from the vault chamber, and mounted upon a raised platform at the center of the courtyard, for the entire gathering to witness directly. She walked toward it slowly, aware of hundreds of eyes following her every step, aware of Draven watching from the front of the crowd with an expression of fierce, unwavering support. She placed her palm against the ancient metal once more, and this time, the response was immediate and overwhelming, golden light exploding outward from the seal, in brilliant waves that washed over the entire courtyard, illuminating every face gathered to witness the moment. The light burned brighter than it had during its initial activation weeks earlier, brighter, Corwin would later admit, than any account of the seal's activation recorded even in the earliest days of the Ashcombe dynasty. When the light finally faded, leaving Mira standing breathless and trembling before the assembled crowd, Elder Corwin stepped forward, his expression finally, fully transformed from suspicion into something like genuine awe. "The seal has spoken," he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. "Its judgment cannot be disputed. Mira Voss carries legitimate claim to the Ashcombe bloodline, confirmed beyond any doubt this trial could have demanded." A wave of reaction rippled through the gathered crowd, some cheering, others murmuring in continued uncertainty about what this confirmation truly meant for the future of the pack's succession. Draven moved through the crowd quickly, reaching Mira's side and taking her trembling hands in his own, his relief and pride evident in every line of his expression. "You did it," he said softly, for her ears alone amid the noise of the crowd around them. "We did it," Mira corrected. "Together." As the formal proceedings drew toward their conclusion, the assembled pack leaders turned their attention toward the question that had brought them all here in the first place, the matter of succession, now that Mira's claim had been definitively confirmed. Corwin, along with several of the more traditional elders, expected Mira to press a formal challenge for the throne itself, a division of power that would fracture the current stability of the pack, or perhaps even displace Draven entirely, in favor of the bloodline the seal had so overwhelmingly recognized. Mira, however, stepped forward before any such formal challenge could be proposed, raising her voice to address the assembled crowd directly. "I did not come to this trial seeking to take a throne from someone who has led this pack with fairness and care," she said, her voice growing steadier with each word. "I came seeking only the truth of who I am, and justice for a family that was wrongfully erased from this fortress's history. I have found both of those things now, more fully than I ever expected." She turned to look at Draven, something warm and certain passing between them in that moment. Rather than dividing this pack through contested succession, I propose instead that our bloodlines be joined, formally and fully, healing the very wound that generations of fear and violence created in the first place." A stunned silence fell over the courtyard, followed quickly by a rising murmur of surprise and, gradually, approval, as the assembled pack leaders considered the elegant simplicity of her proposal. Draven stared at her for a long moment, something like wonder, mingling with the deep affection that had grown steadily between them over the preceding weeks. "Are you certain this is what you want?" he asked quietly. "I am certain," Mira said, "that I would rather build something new alongside you than tear apart what you have already worked so hard to protect. My family's claim does not need to destroy yours to finally be honored. It only needs to be acknowledged and joined rather than erased all over again." Draven's answering smile carried more genuine happiness than Mira had seen from him in all the weeks she had known him. He turned to address the assembled crowd, raising his voice to carry across the courtyard. "Let it be known," he announced, "that the ancient wound this fortress has carried for generations is healed today, not through further division, but through unity. Mira Voss, last surviving heir of the bloodline, wrongfully purged from these walls, will stand beside me, not as a rival, but as an equal partner, in leading this pack forward." The response from the crowd was immediate and overwhelming, cheers rising into the afternoon air, even Corwin offering a deep, respectful bow that carried genuine acknowledgement rather than mere formality. Ilsa Kessler, watching from among the assembled witnesses, offered Mira a knowing, approving smile, perhaps recognizing in this resolution exactly the kind of stability she had claimed to seek from the very beginning. As the celebrations began to unfold around them, Draven turned to Mira, taking her hands once more, his golden eyes bright with an emotion that needed no further words to express. 412 years, he said softly. The seal waited in silence for this exact moment, for exactly the right person to walk through that vault door and finally wake it again. "I did not know, when I stumbled against that door with a broom in my hand," Mira said, smiling despite the tears gathering unexpectedly in her eyes, "that I was about to change everything, both for myself and for this entire fortress." Sometimes the most significant moments in history begin with the smallest, most unplanned actions, Draven said, drawing her closer as the golden afternoon light settled warmly over the celebrating crowd around them. A stumble, a touch, a seal, finally recognizing the blood it had waited so patiently to find again. As the sun began its slow descent toward the distant hills, casting long shadows across the courtyard filled with celebration, Mira allowed herself, for the first time since that fateful afternoon in the vault chamber, to fully embrace the future stretching out before her, not as an orphaned servant with no name worth remembering, but as the living proof that even the deepest wounds a family history could carry might, given enough courage and enough time, finally begin to heal. The iron seal, its golden light long since faded back into quiet, ancient stillness, remained mounted at the center of the courtyard, as darkness slowly gathered overhead, its long silence finally broken, its purpose finally fulfilled, standing as a permanent testament to a bloodline that no purge, no fear, and no passage of centuries had ever truly managed to erase.